Hi, I'm Sheila Henson. I'm an ADHD coach, and you can find me on my website at sheilahenson.com. This is...
Hi, I'm Kamden Hainsworth. You can find me on TikTok, Kamden_ADHD, and I am also an ADHD coach, but mostly an ADHD advocate and connector, and my website is theadhddirectory.com.
Oh yeah, I'm also on TikTok, ADHD Coach Sheila. And one of the things that Kamden and I have both been really frustrated with is that there does not seem to exist a simple guide to ADHD 101. If you just got diagnosed or you're starting to think that you might have ADHD, just getting to know, what is it, what can be done about it, and like, where do I go to find those resources? And so we decided to put that together for you, and we're going to sort of introduce it today very casually by just talking to you.
That's exactly right. So we just we've gotten together over the past couple weeks and have outlined some of the most common questions that we have both been getting from our audiences, from our clients, from you all. And we will try to get into a little bit more detail than what we would normally put on our social media. But hopefully also in the show notes down below, you guys will have different clickable links that you can go and find more information about as well. So our very first part is going to be, what is the DSM versus diagnostic DSM and diagnostic criteria for ADHD? I'm going to give this to you, Sheila.
Yeah, I think so I actually found something new recently, which is that there's two different diagnostic criteria for ADHD. One is used primarily in the US, and then one is used more in Europe, but they also do use the DSM-5 in Europe as well. So the first one is the International Statistical Clarification of Disease and Related Health Problems, and they are on their 10th revision. And in that, it actually refers to ADHD as hyperkinetic disorder. And I've done a little bit of research on that, and it seems to be a slightly different take on what ADHD is, and sort of connects it to a bunch of other disorders that are also hyperkinetic disorders, but also seems, similarly to the term ADHD, a little bit of a misnomer, and also a little bit narrow as far as what the person with ADHD actually experiences is not completely contained within this diagnosis. The more traditional one that you would hear in the United States is from the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM-5, that we're on the 5th edition. Hopefully the 6th edition will have more insights, but as of now, ADHD is in there with two different sets of criteria, one for inattentive type ADHD and one for hyperactive type. And if you meet 6 or more of each one, you have that. If you meet 6 or more of the criteria of both, you have combined type. So that's the way that they're diagnosing now. For those of you who were diagnosed with ADD, that no longer exists according to the DSM-5. It's now usually going to be categorized as inattentive ADHD or combined type. So you might want to get reassessed if you're curious which one you are.
Yeah, it's also really helpful if you're working with a psychologist or a nurse practitioner or a psychiatrist. It's a pretty, I don't want to say like judge them only by one word, but if they're still calling it ADD, it might be good to ask some follow-up questions as to how often they are working and updating their knowledge about ADHD, because that is a little bit outdated term. I would, that's my personal opinion.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing with everything with the brain is that we learn so rapidly and so quickly that things become outdated very fast. And so I have tons of empathy for psychiatrists and therapists who do end up outdated. I do also think that they have a responsibility when they when they have a client that has this issue to go and do that research. And so, don't feel bad about pushing them to do that a little bit if you're their client. You're paying them.
That happened to me with my awesome psychiatrist. And it was just a matter of saying, hey, I think I sent him an article. I mentioned it and I just sent him an article. I was like, I heard that they're no longer calling it ADD. They're calling it ADHD inattentive. And he's like, oh, well, thank you for that. And so I sent him an article. It wasn't like, he can judge me however he wants, but he was awesome. He is an awesome psychiatrist. But don't be afraid to put it out there.
Yeah. And
not,
I mean,
not be
honestly,
snarky.
yeah, right. Excuse me, ADD doesn't, no, but you can, yeah, I mean, sending, if you don't feel comfortable sending your mental health practitioner of any kind, like articles and information, then they're like, you probably don't have the trust that you need even to make the kind of
That's a
progress
good
you
point.
want.
Yeah, you want to have
So,
open communication with them. So good point.
yeah.
Love it.
So this is the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria. You can look through it. You can find it on the internet anywhere you'd like. But something to keep in mind with it is that it was written specifically for sort of young boys. And so if you are not a child or a boy, then ADHD might look a little bit different for you. And so there are certain things that, does work for adults, like losing your wallets, keys, things like that. But something like on the go as if driven by a motor, like probably if you're an adult, you're not just like running around in circles and like climbing on chairs, right? You've developed skills, and that might look more like you are compulsively eating or fidgeting or can't get off the computer or something like that. So when you're looking at the diagnostic criteria, keep in mind that it sort of has to be translated into, what it might look like for an individual person, which might be a little bit different than what's in the DSM-5.
Perfect.
People of color are much less likely to get diagnosed, particularly Black and Indigenous folks are much less likely to be diagnosed, even though the rate of them having ADHD is exactly the same. Regardless of ethnicity, everybody has ADHD at the same percentage. But the diagnosis tends to be behavioral, something like ODD, or, just diagnosed with behavioral issues for people of color. So because of that, it's important that we have, when we're talking about like all of these resources and things like that, looking for voices so it started with women, right? At first, like women were highly underdiagnosed. We're doing much better now. A lot of the voices in ADHD now that I hear are female voices. And so I feel like we're really coming up, and I feel very seen as a white female in the ADHD community. However, like that still needs to happen more for people of color, and particularly white women, people of color, women of color. And so like that. And so when it comes to getting a diagnosis, if you find yourself as a person of color not getting diagnosed, recognizing that those biases do still exist, and that those diagnostic criteria were written for white people and for males. And so that needs to be taken into consideration.
Yep. I have personal experience with that. My daughter birth dad is Black, is African-American. And a lot of the things when we were first just learning about ADHD and how all of that happens, it was just like, no, these are characteristics that were so, and I don't know, I'm probably not going to say all of this correctly, but no, she's loud because she's Black. No, she's boisterous because she's Black. No, she's expressive and whatever because she's Black. And it was just kind of like shoot off. And I'm like, no, I know my daughter. Thank you. Like, I understand. And so there are, like, even as a mom, like I heard that, and that wasn't just from clinicians, that's from social, influences and people that I just know. But in addition to that, it's just kind of sad. It's just kind of sad that that's the case, that we're just writing it off, like you're saying, as something, as a behavior or as a culture, versus something that could potentially be treated and helped over an extended period of time for incredible people of color, Black and Indigenous as well, that need help. So
for sure. And it's unfortunate, like how many parents I've heard, when someone suggests, I never suggest that someone has ADHD, but their doctor might, and they will say, that's a white person thing. Like, that's silly. That's a white person thing. And I'm just going like, I can't be the one to tell you, but it's not a white person thing. It's absolutely not. It's an every type of person thing. White people just tend to get treated for it more because we have that privilege. Or if you don't like the word privilege, you could just call it lack of oppression. Same thing. So like, lack of bias, or the bias is more in our favor. So we tend to get treated more for things like that. Whereas, yeah, it could be considered, and there's nothing wrong with being loud and boisterous, but your daughter's probably struggling with a lot of
Yes,
things that are,
that's the problem. Like,
and she
I'm
needs
loud.
support.
I'm also loud. Like, I'm just, and I hope that you guys hear what I'm saying when I said that. And these are things that people have mentioned to me.
Yeah.
Just trying to dismiss the very fact. And the difference, let me tell you the difference of when my daughter got on medication to when she was not on medication. It has completely changed our life. It has completely changed her life. It has allowed her to feel complete, to not be so all over the place that she can't be the exact human she was meant to be on this earth. And so it's very sad to me. It's to understand how, if I was just dismissive because of my cultural bias and my lack of knowledge, how this child and her family would not be able to have the amounts of love. Like, it would just be so very different. It would be much, much harder. So thank you for bringing that up. Thank you for remembering.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Another question that we get really often are, what are the common traits that are not included in the diagnostic criteria that are often found with ADHDers? This is a lot of the time what you see on social media as we kind of poke fun, or we are gathering our community, if you will. And so I'm just going to go ahead and list off a few of the ones that Sheila and I came up with, and then we're going to go into a little bit more personal detail about all of them after I'm done. So the first one is executive dysfunction. Then emotional regulation struggles, object permanence, trouble prioritizing, holy cow, time management struggles, hyperfocus, memory troubles, sensory seeking, and RSD. So the executive dysfunction, I've heard this talked about in a variety of different ways. A lot of the time, what you guys would classify this as and judge yourself as is laziness. And Sheila actually has an awesome TikTok all about this, but it's not laziness. When you have ADHD, it's executive dysfunction. And once you start to get to understand the different criteria of executive dysfunction, it will make a lot more sense as to why it is you feel like you are unable to get the thing done or get up out of your seat and go do the thing. That can all stem back to executive dysfunction. You have anything else you want to add with that, Sheila?
Yeah, definitely. I think that a big part of executive dysfunction is just trouble with transitions. And I was joking about this with a family that like that could even be to like getting in the shower, because like going from dry to wet or then getting out of the shower. There was some family I was working with was saying,
Totally.
Yeah, my kid, they don't want to get in the shower, but once they get in, they don't want to get out. They're in there for 40 minutes. And it's like, we don't like any transition, waking to sleeping, sleeping to waking. It's hard for us to, from doing one thing to another thing. So any kind of transition is going to be harder for us. And then like Kamden said, it sometimes looks like laziness, like but what's happening to the outside is that we're just sitting there and not doing the thing. We're not doing the dishes, or we're not cleaning up our stuff, or we're not getting our homework done, or we're not finishing this project.
Right.
But what it's looking like in our minds is this like chaos of guilt and shame and why can't I do it, and confusion and feel, and like bargaining with yourself. Oh, I can do it later. I can wait a little longer. I can procrastinate a little longer. I always do better at the deadline, which is true. We do better after we procrastinate because we're all hyped up on adrenaline and stressed out, and that can get us into the focus phase. But living like that is not healthy, right? We don't want to live our lives in a constant state of stress. Yeah, exactly. So, it's a great tool for certain situations, but ideally we don't want to live in crisis. So yeah, executive dysfunction seems to be the thing that people have the most guilt and shame about, because their whole lives they've been told that they were not living up to their potential, they're lazy, they don't care, things like that. And that's just not true. We do care, and we aren't lazy. We're doing a lot of mental and emotional work while it looks like we're sitting there. And that's the difference. Absolutely. If you're being lazy, then you should feel relaxed and happy and like, oh, I'm being lazy, which also I don't think is negative. I mean, we should all be lazy every once in a while, right? Everybody likes a lazy day. But when you're in the throes of executive dysfunction, there's nothing relaxing about that. And so very well that you're not being lazy.
Yeah. There's actually a really great podcast that I listen to that I can link here too, from Attitude Experts. It's Dr. Barkley talking.
Barkley.
Yeah. And he's talking about a little bit about like diagnostic criteria. So it kind of goes along with what we just talked about. And then it gets quite specific and into executive functioning and how that looks in adults. So I'll go ahead and link that in the show notes as well. I think it would be really interesting. You guys will go ahead and search for all the executive dysfunction, the executive functions. Do a search on that because it's really going to get a little bit more specific about that. So our next one is emotional regulation struggles. Oh man. So I don't know. For me, this is one of the things that really, when I started recognizing ADHD in myself, this was one of the biggest reliefs that came over me, because I was getting really frustrated with knowing that I could be very happy and then very frustrated very quickly. And I could go through all the different spectrums all day long. And once I recognized that had a little bit more to do with emotional regulation or dysregulation as part of my ADHD, I was less hard on myself, and I gave myself more patience and grace to just show up as me. And then when I started to feel myself get really worked up, whether it might be really happy or really, frustrated or sad, it was so cool to say, this is part of my ADHD and I have choice. I have choice. Thoughts, I see you. Emotions, I feel you. What do I really want to do? I don't have to just be in response to all of my thoughts and my feelings. I get to choose right now if I want to continue on with this feeling and continue on with this thought, or if I want to stop it, pause, feel it, and then change the direction of where I'm going. It was a huge game changer. I was no longer, I guess you could say, a victim of my mind. I started to take more of the control on myself. But really quickly, I just want to say that that's not easy and that it takes time, and that it's not to discredit the fact that this is actually happening in our body. I'm not saying, well, just figure it out and learn how to control your body. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that by recognizing that emotional regulation struggle is part of ADHD, we get to now pause and we get to recognize it as something that is is our out of box programming, if you will, right? And we, if we so choose, can start to work on how to reprogram a little bit at a time, tiny bits at a time. So I'm not saying that to make you feel bad. I'm just saying that to say there's hope. And you're not crazy. This is something that's actually worthwhile.
Yes, absolutely. And part of the emotional dysregulation piece of ADHD is something that people just lose their minds when they learn about, which is RSD, or rejection sensitive dysphoria. Yeah. And that means that when we are rejected, we take it so hard, like so crazy hard, where people think like, what is going on? Like I always think about when I was a kid and I would have a friend over and they would just be like, I feel like I'm going to go home. Actually, like I'm tired. And I'd be like, okay, that's fine. And then just be crushed and like cry for like the whole day and feel like everyone hates me and I'm alone and and this feeling like everyone hates me, even when there's no evidence for that, that's rejection sensitive dysphoria. And the things that help with that, for me has been to have a group of friends that are long-term, that understand me, that are also neurodivergent, actually. And so I have the security with that friend group, where if someone doesn't like me, I don't care, because I know who loves me. And then I also have found self-esteem, I guess, like where I actually value myself and have the feeling that, if you don't like me, that's really your problem. Not to say that I don't still struggle with rejection, even maybe more than a neurotypical person would, but definitely, like you said, with the emotional stuff, I can definitely separate this from myself and go, that thing's happening again, where I feel this super rejection because someone looked at me funny or didn't return my text within 30 seconds. And so with the rejection sensitive dysphoria, just so you all know, again, there is hope. It's not something that you're going to have to struggle with your whole life. If there are therapies for these things, and we're going to talk about some of the options for that later on in the video.
Perfect. That's perfect. So the next one is object permanence, and there's a million things we could talk about here. But for me, especially during COVID, if I'm being honest, this has what's that called? It's like poked out its evil head a little bit when it comes to my relationships. It's not that I don't know that my friends exist. It's that I don't think to connect with them. And because we are all so separate from each other and unable to actually be in a physical space, it makes it a lot harder for me to have, like, we're not like necessarily scheduling friend Zoom calls. Maybe we should, but that kind of idea of out of sight, out of mind is object permanence or impermanence. And this often also happens like with groceries where we buy something, we put it in a drawer, like a vegetable drawer, and then it goes bad because we don't see it when we automatically open that fridge. But this can happen in relationships as well. And it's been really helpful for me. For a while, I actually had a little list of my top 10 friends, but the top 10 people for that month that I actually wanted to connect with at least once every couple weeks. And I would make it in front of my face right here on my desk so that so that I don't want to put it that way, so that I could continue to have a positive relationship with people that I truly did care about.
Yeah, I also have I'll pick a day if I have a free day and go, oh, this is check-in day, and I'll just go through and text, everyone in my phone or whatever,
So
just to make
good.
sure that I don't. Yeah. And then it always ends with something good. I'm actually tomorrow I have a Discord group hang with some of my friends.
That's
and
awesome.
because we can't be together. And so I think that it's really important to do that, especially because with ADHD and with the rejection sensitive dysphoria, we can tend to feel very alone. And also being with friends can give us those good neurotransmitters that make us happy and motivated. And so that's a really important thing. And then, another thing with the object permanence of items is that it can also go the other way, where if something is somewhere for too long, you stop seeing it, right? So right. So let's say you leave the cup out and then 3 days later, your roommate's like, that cup has been there. And you're like, what cup? So it can definitely go both ways with objects.
Totally. I thank you for bringing that up. That happens a lot with our sticky notes, right? So having to every so often tweak our systems that have worked for so long, but then for maybe a week don't work anymore. Unfortunately, it might be time just to tweak the system just enough. Maybe we post it in a different place, or it's a different color, or our calendar is no longer hung up in our kitchen. It's in our bathroom, whatever it might be, just so that we can stimulate our mind a little bit more for that. I love it.
Yeah. That's something about ADHD is someone said consistently inconsistent.
Exactly.
And I love that. And the cool thing about it is that we are super creative, right? We're out of the box thinkers. That's part of the ADHD experience. And so we have to have faith that when a system stops working, instead of sitting and beating ourselves up about it or being like, why can't I do this? I'm so lazy. What's wrong with me? Just being like, oh, it's not working. Time to do something else. And you said, switch it up. And when you change that attitude and that mindset about it, suddenly it becomes a creative pursuit instead of this condemning of yourself or guilt and shame spiral.
That's exactly right. I love that, which I think, and we don't have to get into it now, but is a huge portion of starting to take back our life with ADHD is a mindset shift.
Yeah.
Which is huge. Approaching it, like you're saying, with creativity, with positivity, with optimism, instead of with condemnation. So that's super awesome. Okay. Next one. What do we got? We got trouble prioritizing. I still struggle with this every day of my life. Externalizing is so helpful, but I like to think about, I always say I have colander hands, which is really weird visual, but a colander that you pour your pasta into. And if all of my thoughts are up there, I am just kind of swooping for whatever one I can get out of my head. And then once I have them here, it's I'm so paranoid that they're going to slip through my hands that I'm just just do the thing that's in front of my face, right? Because I don't know when it's going to disappear again. And it's a lot of time that is harmful with our prioritization and not knowing which one takes precedence over another. And once we can start to actually externalize our thoughts and look at these things concretely as individual aspects with very clear visual breakdown of how to do the task, then prioritizing can become awesome. But that process feels like it's going to be very painful for an ADHDer. Feels exactly the opposite of efficient. but it's actually the thing that is going to help us become more efficient. So
yeah, something that I think really helps is because we do whatever is in front of our face does feel like the most important thing in the world, right? Or like whatever is stimulating to us in the moment. So I always recommend like in those quiet moments at the end of the night or in the beginning of the morning, like create a list of your priorities. And I've heard over and over like the top 3 things, like pick 3 things you want to get done that day, and that's your priority. And if you can get those 3 things done, then you win. Like, right, like everything else you can sort of like flitter around. But yeah, but choosing those when you're in a space that's sort of an empty-headed, as empty-headed as we can get,
totally.
space, so that you can actually prioritize like what really matters and not just what's the shiniest in the moment.
Absolutely. Great advice. Do you want to talk about time management struggles?
Ugh, that's my I have those.
We all have those.
Yeah. So with ADHD, we have just like a bad sense of time, essentially. So people can call it time blindness, where sometimes we're hyperfocus and hours can go by and we're just like, whoa, where did the time go? Or sometimes if we, let's say, need to wait in line, it can feel like it's taking hours when it's actually only 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So our sense of time is completely related to how interested and engaged we are in what's going on around us. And so that can be a big problem when it comes to being late. And that then becomes a social problem, because when you're late, your boss or your friends or your partner thinks that you're disrespecting them or you don't care about them. And that's really not what it is at all. It's that you literally do not have the skills to get a place on time because of the way that your brain works. And there are a lot of coping strategies that you can use for that, as far as alarms and things like that. But in the end, it's always going to be harder for someone with ADHD to be on time, just because of the way our brain works. And it has nothing to do with how much we care about who we're going to meet or what we're going to be on time for.
Yeah. One of the most interesting articles I read about this too, that stuck with me, is the idea of us having to wait and be places early. Which I think is so funny, that there's this fear inside of us of being somewhere early. So even subconsciously, we're pushing things off to the last minute. Yes, because we don't know what 10 minutes feels like. Yes, because we can't estimate how long it actually does take to get from my house to the grocery store as well. But also because leaving a half hour early to be somewhere on time seems so completely absurd. Like, what would I do if I got there early? Like, why
Even
would
though
I do
that is a coping strategy a lot of people with ADHD use. They're so anxious about being late that they actually just end up going places an hour, half an hour early. And so some people who are just like chronically super early, it's like the same problem sort of. It's just that that's what the way that
reversed.
they dealt with it. Yeah, exactly. Another reason I think why it's so hard for us is because, like I was saying, when we're in a stressful situation, it makes us more productive and more focused. And so let's say you've been lazy all day and now you need to go to class. So because you're late for class, you're feeling super motivated and focused. And now you see all these things you need to do, like, oh, I'm gonna do that dish. Oh, I'm gonna clean my room. I'm gonna do that dish. I'm gonna send this text message I forgot about. So even though you just sat on your butt for 3 hours doing nothing, now that you have 5 minutes to get to class, you are super motivated and ready to get all these things done. And how could you not? Because you're feeling so guilty about not doing them before.
Gotta make it for it. Yeah, I can do it fast.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of the ADHD struggles are doing one stupid thing to make up for feeling bad for doing it.
Unfortunately, I think you're right.
My mindset is so important, right?
Yeah.
Those people that overwork, right? They're going to work 12 hours a day and become completely obsessed with their job because they feel guilty that when they go home, they're not doing the dishes, or they feel like they're not doing enough. So then they become these like in the things that they're good at doing, they become obsessed with, and, like there's no balance. There's a lot of, overcompensation in our lives.
Like, I feel like people watching this are going to be like this because this is so common.
Yeah.
It's so common. We don't realize that it actually is only going to take us 7.5 minutes to take the dishes in the sink to the dishwasher. And yet we will spend 6 extra hours at the office, right? Or in front of our computer working to make up for the fact that we can't, because we're good at the computer. Yeah. And it's just, time is everything. Yeah. This time struggle. So, okay. Speaking of which, hyperfocus kind of goes right into that as well. And like this ability to work 12 to 14 hours a day without stopping, without feeding herself and having to go to the bathroom. Like that, not that I recommend any of those things, but I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Yep.
I know I just finished my deck. It's quite a large deck. It's big. And I just built
finished it. Congratulations.
I know it's been a long time. And, but for 2 weeks, for about 10 days or so, that's all that I was doing. One sec. Honey, you can't come in here. Sorry. We'll cut that out. So that's all that I was doing for, I don't know, a week and a half. And my husband had to bring me lunch, or else I would have just eaten like an apple and a piece of bread and would have called it good. When we get into that hyper focus state, it's incredible what we can accomplish like on our own. One of the lies that I tell myself in hyper focus is if I get interrupted, there's no way I can get back to this hyper focus.
Yeah.
It's just this
a lot of people hear that. And a lot of people get so frustrated because of that. Like a lot of people have trouble with the emotional dysregulation of being interrupted with hyperfocus. Right. If they're in hyperfocus and someone comes up and says, "Hey, did you want something?" And you're like, "Get away from me!" We have to work on. And some people, are so hyperfocused. They just don't hear it. People can be talking to you, calling your name. This is really a problem for me. There's a family story where, because my dad clearly has ADHD, and he was doing something on his computer, and my little sisters were about 5, and they were like, "We're going to go to the neighbor's house." And he was like, "Okay." And like totally answered them, but didn't, register it.
Compute.
They left. And then he came out of hyperfocus and couldn't find them and ended up calling the police because that's how like far away from what was happening.
I believe that story so much though.
Yeah.
As a mom of 3 little kids, they're like, "Mom, but you said," I was like, "I did." It was like the automatic, like if I nod my head, then maybe I can keep doing what I'm going to do. So,
right. Like then you'll go away. And I had, a couple, I was asking me the mom of the kids was like, "I'm worried about, because my husband has ADHD, that if I leave him with the kids, that like they're going to get lost." And I was like, "Yeah, you probably need to make like, that's reasonable. And you probably need to make a rule that he's not allowed on the computer while he's babysitting."
Exactly. And that's where the communication comes in, and where, in my opinion, ADHD coaching becomes so essential. Or for some people, just advocating for your ADHD in general, whether that's medication and coaching, whatever it is, setting up systems in your home as you get clear on your challenges and your strengths, set up those systems so that you can use those to help you regulate your life. We have those as well. So I got to know. Oh man. Okay. Next one is memory trouble. Short-term memory is terrible in my brain. There's a lot that you can do for it, but pretty much our short-term memory really sucks. And I have also found that it's very strange. Like our brain holds on to very random things that we have kind of gotten a dopamine kick from, or that were rejection sensitivity, and so there's emotional attachment to them, or they stood out to us differently and our creative brain started to hyperfixate on them. But simple things that most people can remember, like from my childhood or from big events in my life, that they're like, "How did you not remember that?" I'm like, "Nope, no recollection." So
the worst is when your friend is like, "I've never told anyone this before," and they tell you this secret, and you're like, "Oh my gosh!" But then you can't talk about it because it's a secret.
I know. And so then it doesn't
sort
stick.
And then 2 years later, they're like, "That thing I told you," and you're like, and they're like, "This was so important. How could you have forgotten?" I'm like, "Because I was good. I didn't talk about it. If I don't talk about it, it goes away." That can be really frustrating. I think part of it too is that we're not always present. Like part of ADHD is that we're not focused, and you're not going to remember when you're not really present. Like we spend a lot of our lives in our heads. And I think that also, which is something we don't have on here really, is social skill issues,
Yeah.
especially in children, but that can even go up to adults, where kids with ADHD have trouble with social boundaries or social norms, sometimes relationships, they're more likely to be bullied, things like that. And I think part of it is because we learn social skills by observation, right?
Totally.
No one teaches that. I mean,
We're
I do
not
at my school, but
observing.
most people don't teach that. Yeah, by observing. And if we're not present, we're not observing.
Yeah.
And so we're not picking up on the social cues, which is different than autism, where the brain is not picking up those social cues. It's
Right.
actually that we're just not paying attention. If we are paying
Yeah.
attention, we can pick up the social cues, but often we're not paying attention. And so those social skills come later for a lot. There's like a social immaturity often with ADHD because of that. And that just, it has to do with
that. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, I was just saying that I think that memory troubles is the same thing. It's like we're just not present. And so there are some things that it takes us longer to learn.
Yeah. And I'm really glad that you brought that up, because there's another thing that we didn't mention that I'm remembering right now. Are we good with memory?
Yeah.
Guys, our memory isn't great. but there are things, like everything else, there are coping techniques, there are lots of things that we can do. One of my biggest things is I started to like assign my responsibilities to other people, or say, guess what, I can't function with this many things for me to remember. So husband, take this. Or guess what, it's no longer a priority for me to have to clean my bathroom once a month. Like, we have to do it once every other month, and that's gross, but I live by myself, whatever it might be. Sorry, maybe not once a month, but whatever it might be. Maybe that is normal actually for our audience. So I'm not alone in that.
Wherever you're at, we support you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, honestly, I'm like, well, it's kind of my truth there, but whatever it is, but reassessing, like if I'm constantly forgetting things and they're actually not important for my life, and I end up beating myself up about them, then let's reframe our priorities a little bit. And that does help with memory and getting stuff done. So, but what I was going to say is, oversharing. Do we have anything about this?
Oh yeah.
And that kind of goes,
but we should.
yeah,
Sure.
about like our social cues. And it also goes with time blindness, time management strategies, because, oh, you froze a little bit. There we go. So it goes with both of them, because I think we don't know how long we've been talking, and we're just oversharing. We don't know like how many details are appropriate to share and not quote unquote appropriate, right? And it can make people feel very uncomfortable or very annoyed. And it's also another part of being very self-aware. We're not always the most self-aware humans. And when I found out about my ADHD, I completely shifted my pendulum way over here when I learned about this. I like to talk. I'm a verbal processor. It's actually what a lot of people say they enjoy about conversing with me, because I can also be a good listener. But when I became so paranoid when I learned I had ADHD, that I just started not talking. And that became really hard for me, to keep so much inside, to be so observant, and to feel like even when I talked for 45 seconds, that it was actually 10 minutes. I share that because if you guys are feeling like this, it's okay. It's part of the process of getting to know yourself. But the biggest thing is to be yourself, but just become more self-aware. And it's not something that's going to happen overnight, but it's helpful.
Yeah, it happens a lot with kids when they're told by, parents who think they're being helpful, you talk too much, you need to stop talking, you're talking too much, you're annoying people, you need to stop. And then there's this shame, and then they just shut up. And then you have these people that are very, holding everything in and feeling repressed and oppressed. And that leads to depression and a lot of self-hatred and things like that. Like we do tend to be external processors. Even if you're an introvert, you still, need to get things out verbally and talk about your feelings and talk through your thoughts. Our mind is a really weird scrambled place, and so putting it into words is something that can help. And if you have something like dyslexia as well, where words are troublesome for you, then even like doing some kind of art or music or something like that, having some external way of processing your thoughts is really, really important.
Write a song.
Yeah. I mean, and people with ADHD do tend to be very musical and very physical and, you know, make sculptures, make, you know, whatever. But having a way of processing our thoughts and feelings externally is really, really important for us. And also something that, yeah, when you're a kid, sometimes can be looked down on, or you could be judged for. I'm so happy with my external processing at this point. Like, I just talk to myself through the day. I sing, narrate everything I'm doing.
I love it.
And the people,
Oh, I love it.
the people that are in my life, they love it. They love me for it. And some of them are like that and some of them aren't, but they are entertained by me, and that's all that matters. The people who are annoyed by that, they don't need to hang out with me. Like, that's fine. I don't need them.
Yeah. And if I could add some perspective on this as a parent of an ADHDer too, I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but having ADHD, not you personally, you, the general you, but having ADHD myself and having a daughter that has very extreme ADHD, sometimes the feeling that I have is annoyance, and that can kind of go up with our sensory issues sometimes too. And I have, you know, wholeheartedly been that parent that has been like, please stop talking. Like, I can't take another word. Like, you are being so obnoxious right now. Like, please stop tapping your sister repeatedly after she said no 16,000 times, you know? And so I kind of want to, for the parents that are out there that are working with ADHD kids, I want to validate the feelings of frustration. Even if you don't have ADHD, guys, by all means, kids with ADHD can be annoying. Okay, they can.
Heck yeah.
So
I am annoying.
Yes. And I think that it's something that we're afraid to talk about because we don't want to place labels, but just by using the term, okay, we're not going to call the kid annoying, but as adults, if we're talking, they can be very, very obnoxious.
They can be overstimulating. They can trigger a frustration
There
response.
You go. There are the appropriate coaching words to use. Yes. But what Sheila has said is a fantastic tool as a parent to help your child know that whatever they want to express, they can. I was an elementary school teacher for a number of years, and I had a social studies professor that said that in her elementary school classroom, she always had a picture of the current president on the wall. And if they got a little bit of oversharing, she would say, that's an amazing thing. Go tell it to the president. And so they would stand in front of the wall and they would tell the president all the feelings until they felt like they had processed it all. And what Sheila has said is that now she, as an adult, does that for herself. She doesn't have to look at a picture on the wall, but she is okay with verbally processing by herself. But little kids don't have always the techniques, the coping, those strategies that can be helpful. Maybe you can say, oh my goodness, I cannot wait to hear the rest of the story, but I need an illustration. Can you please go draw a picture of the story that you're telling me? And sometimes in the very nature of them drawing the picture, they are able to get out that satisfaction of processing, and then they don't need to talk to you about it anymore. So I just want to validate the parents out there. Yes. And also let them know that if they're feeling that, there are different ways to help your child still be able to process what they're
Tell it to the pets, go tell it to the dog, tell it to the cat.
There you go.
Yeah, draw me a picture of it. Can you write this down? Can you, this sounds like a story. Can you go write it into a story?
Exactly.
Yep.
And then they're going to have those tools as they grow up to be adults, and they don't have to feel so annoying, hushed, quieted. They're going to start to realize, oh, I'm feeling this way. My mom usually tells me, or my dad usually tells me to go do this. So
and you can develop skills too. I mean, that's something when I was a kid, I was very shy. So even though I have all this need for external processing, and now I like to talk constantly, but as a kid, I didn't want to talk to anybody because I was afraid of people. I didn't do well with people. So I wrote a lot, and it became a skill where at school, it was something I got awards for, and things was for writing.
Wow,
and it's funny now that I talk a lot, I don't write very much, and I think it's because that need is now being met by me talking. Maybe I need to shut up so I can get some writing done. But yeah.
It's so interesting. I'm very much the same. Before I knew I had ADHD, I loved to write. I wrote music, I wrote blogs, I wrote long posts that got a lot of attention. And now that I'm talking to people constantly, it's like, yeah, I'm satisfied. It all goes back to the dopamine.
Totally. Yep. Same with
Awesome.
drawing, like as like a fidget, like and things like that, where it's like, oh, I always was into art, but partially because I can't just sit still, I can't watch a movie, so or have a conversation. I would be drawing in a sketchbook constantly while I was talking to people, while I was watching movies, while I was doing anything in meetings. If I didn't have drawing in meetings, what would I do? You know, but now that I have such like a busy life, like I just don't need to draw as much because I'm not sitting as much, you know.
Yeah.
So those coping skills can become more than just coping skills. They can become passions, and they can become, you know, really important skills.
Outlets.
Skills.
Yeah. Love it. So cool.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting into all different kinds of things. Okay, the next one we have on here is sensory seeking. We've kind of talked about it all throughout this. Is there something?
It can also be sensory avoiding as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, like there's sensory seeking and sensory avoiding. And people often think about this and link it with autism. And I've even seen people with autism being like, well, now ADHD is trying to like claim sensory stuff. It's different. It's different, but we still do have sort of extra sensory needs. I'm fidgeting with this. What is this even? I don't know. I think, oh, it's for eyelashes. Never even used it. Impulse buy right here.
It's a fidget toy.
Yeah. So now it's my fidget. So like we have a need for sensory things. So like touching, you'll see kids with ADHD, they're touching on things, they're climbing things, they're playing with things, they're picking it up, they're, you know, anything that feels good. I have chickens and like the chicken feed bin, I just put my hands in there. It feels so nice. So we're constantly sensory seeking. Yeah. And that can be, that's part of the annoying, right? They're poking, they're grabbing, they're touching, like they're climbing.
Oh, there's that certain scene in Elf where he's just like, boop, 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 boop. He's like trying to put everything.
That guy has ADHD. But then also there can be sensory avoiding. So like things that are uncomfortable, like a tag or an itchy clothing, or if things are like overstimulated, too loud, and they're going to want to get away from it. Can be overstimulated by it. And it's not going to be to the degree, or it's not going to look like with autism, but it's still there. And so a lot of the tools that have been developed for kids with autism also work for kids with ADHD. A lot of the fidget toys, weighted blankets, sensory tools, chewy toys, that, you know, chewy fidgets and things like that. These are like, you know, luckily autism got a lot of attention, and there are all of these amazing strategies and tools for it. And it works for also kids with ADHD and neurotypical kids. Like everybody has sensory needs. But with ADHD, you might have more, and there might be. So here's a fun story. When I was a kid, I was spanked one time. And it was because I was like 5. It was like time for kindergarten. And I had just putting my socks on, and the little line on the socks, like the stitch, was like not lining up with my toes in the right way. And I had like a meltdown. I was just like crying and screaming. My dad was like, we got to go to school. You're going to be late. And I was like, I can't, like, you know, but I was 5. So I didn't like have words to like describe, like, I'm feeling sensorially overstimulated and discomfort. I just was screaming.
Sweet
right.
Baby
And
Sheila.
he got so and he was like, I'm gonna be late for work if I'm late to drop you off to preschool or whatever. And like he got mad and he spanked me, and then he immediately felt bad and started crying. So then we're both crying like idiots. But it was all over the stupid socks, like of all things. So like a lot of my bad behaviors were actually ADHD. I'd never cleaned my room. I didn't turn in my homework. I had little meltdowns about, you know, getting in the shower or putting my socks on because they were in the wrong thing. So this is a lot of it so like the shower can also be a sensory thing. Sometimes it doesn't feel as good. I figured out I would rather have a bath when I was a kid. Now I like showers, but when I was a kid, I just was like, no, I'm not getting in the shower. So I started taking baths. Cool. But we can have sort of different sensory experiences than a neurotypical person, or higher sensory needs than a neurotypical person. And so having fidget toys, having a lot of exercise, having a lot of like head scratchers around, give each other back massages. Me and my siblings used to do back massage trains. Like we're all neurodivergent. We just figured that out, right? So things like that, the more sensory stimulation that you can give that's positive, then the less obnoxious sensory seeking behaviors you're going to get.
Yeah. Thank you. That was well done. Bravo. And that is like, for adults as well. I am still a nail biter, and I always have been. Luckily I don't get too far down, but I was watching a movie after a very, very, very busy Thanksgiving yesterday, I like had some downtime. My kids were so overstimulated. Speaking of overstimulation, meltdowns galore, emotional dysregulation galore, rejection sensitivity galore. I won't get into the details. All of those things were just expressing themselves. I came down, and because my body and my mind was still everywhere, sitting and watching while it was the thing I needed, there was no like come down for my need to be busy with something with all the extra energy. And I found myself biting my nails uncontrollably. Now, pre-ADHD Kamden would have not even noticed. But because I now notice that that is what was going on, I quickly stopped and found something to hold on to. It was just a pillow that I could rub my hand up and down, right? And I recognize that it's not that I'm nervous always. It's just that I have this extra energy that needs to go somewhere. So even as adults, a lot of the time as adults, like Sheila has her thing, it's really good to have some go-tos and to recognize it. It's great.
Another one of my favorites is my makeup brushes.
Oh, yeah.
Real smooth. I'm doing this a lot with my clients,
lovely.
like under here. They don't know. Yeah.
Y'all have our go-tos that you can't see, but you'll probably throughout this thing, you see me just flip-flop positions, my legs up, my legs down, my legs up, legs back and forth. And that's enough for me right now. So yeah.
That was a perfect segue, the nail biting, into common comorbidities, because one of them is body focused repetitive behavior.
Yep. Some of the common comorbidities that come with ADHD. Comorbidity sounds like a morbid term because of the word, but it just means it's coexisting. It's a condition that's coexisting with ADHD, an additional diagnosis that goes along with ADHD. So the first one we have is, let's read this quote. You put it there. It's good. Do you want to read it, or do you want me to?
Yeah, sure. A person with ADHD is 6 times more likely to have another psychiatric or learning disorder than most other people, and it usually overlaps with other disorders. So if you have ADHD, you probably have a friend to go along with it. And sort of the rejection sensitive dysphoria is both sort of an ADHD trait and a comorbidity, because you can have RSD from having like CPTSD or just really low self-esteem or things like that. But it just almost always goes with ADHD as well.
Yeah, most ADHDers have what they call a sensitive heart. Sensitive soul. So, okay, dyslexia is our first one there. And I'm going to allow you to do that since you have a little bit more personal.
Sure. So yeah, ADHD and dyslexia go together, and that includes like dyscalculia and dysgraphia. I don't know if it's dyscalculia or dyscalculia, even though I have it, I don't know how to say it. Sorry. And then dysgraphia all go under the dyslexia umbrella. And dyslexia is a really cool thing because their brain works completely different, just like an ADHD brain works completely different, but they tend to be less verbal and more picture or image focused, and like think in images, and tend to be really good with like physical and spatial reasoning.
Yeah.
When mixed with ADHD, we get some pretty amazing like carpenters and designers and user experience makers and things like that. So that's I have a lot of friends who have, and clients who have, ADHD and dyslexia, and I love just picking their brain because I'm so verbal that when I talk to someone who thinks more in pictures and has good spatial intelligence, which I don't, I find that really fascinating and fun.
It's way cool. I think I'm in the middle of trying to figure out that aspect of me. So it's all very interesting. I've made no conclusions yet, and eventually I'll go there. But also,
I would in words or pictures.
Mostly pictures, screenshots.
Oh.
Yeah. Kind of like, you know how IKEA just has how things are like put together in IKEA. That's kind of how it is. But I can become very articulate with my words. So, and I was a very poor reader growing up. There's just a lot to it. But what I have learned also is that a lot of people that are adults are also not diagnosed with dyslexia because we have found ways away, roundabout ways, just like with ADHD. I am working currently with a dyslexia specialist who has been in that world for over 10 years. And she didn't believe she had ADHD. We got on the phone on Zoom and she was like, "Whoa, that sounds like dyslexia." And I'm like, "Whoa, that sounds like ADHD." And so we had some fun together. But just know that it's something well worth looking into. Cool.
Yeah, for sure. And there are quizzes online that are amazing. Like, I didn't know my whole life. I knew that I sucked at math and I couldn't do directions. I would get lost in my own neighborhood, and I certain things like that. And telling time on a non-digital clock is still impossible for me.
Wow.
Digital everything.
Yeah.
And I had no idea that was all dyscalculia. So like I took a quiz online because my friend was taking like a dyslexia quiz, and I was like, I always wondered if I had dyscalculia, and it had all these things in it, and I was like, holy crap. And I talked to my psychiatrist about it, and she was like, sounds like you have it. And I was like, if I would have known, I wouldn't have to take statistics 3 times. Anyway.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
I know what I'm doing after this call now.
Yeah.
Go taking some tests. Cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, the next one is also a D word. It is depression, which I just did a TikTok on based on a podcast, and she's a psychologist, but it was really interesting. She talked about the visual that I came up with was like tree roots being ADHD, and then the trunk of the tree ADHD, and then because of our ADHD symptoms, being told to shush our whole life, being told that we're lazy, being told all these things, that we have this branch that comes off that's very low self-esteem and becomes very depressive. That's one way that depression can come, is when it is the first diagnosis ADHD, and then the secondary diagnosis is depression that's linked to it. So oftentimes once we work on our ADHD, some of these will get a little bit better. But there's also the depression that comes in and of itself, that you're clinically depressed and you have ADHD, and they're separate from each other.
Right. Yeah, I definitely, when I was a child, I struggled with really serious depression and like suicidal ideation at like age 10. And it was, looking back, very much because of my ADHD. I had a hard time making friends. I was bullied very heavily. I couldn't seem to get work done. I couldn't get my room clean. I couldn't, basically any expectation, even though I had pretty good grades because I was good at tests and I was good at reading and writing, like I had a lot of expectations on me that I could not fulfill, and I didn't understand why. And, people, they gave me all these tests, like IQ tests and like things like that. And they're like, oh, you're very advanced. So like, what's wrong with you? Like, you just don't care. You're just lazy. Like, why are you trying to hurt everyone? And I'm like, I'm not trying to do I'm just living my life. I'm doing the best I can. I'm a child. And it was a lot of blame on me. And then I had a lot of guilt and shame before I even like had hit puberty. I was like planning a suicide attempt. And it was like, looking back, completely because of my ADHD. And then later on in my life, as I made friends that understood me and started to understand my brain, even though I didn't get a diagnosis until later in life, I did understand sort of that I was different, and I just sort of embraced being a weirdo. And those depression symptoms really went away for me. They don't for everybody, because some people do, like you said, have an actual clinical depression. For me, the depression was absolutely caused by my environment, which was 2 loving parents, a good school system in a nice neighborhood, but just too much expectations that I didn't understand why I couldn't meet. So that's a big thing for people, where a lot of times it's so common. People will be diagnosed with depression and anxiety for years and years and years, and the medications don't work. They don't work. And they're like, why can't I be treated? And it's because actually the root cause is ADHD. And once they treat the ADHD, the anxiety and the depression go away. Unfortunately, many psychiatrists, for some reason, think that you need to treat the anxiety before you treat the
First,
ADHD, or
I
treat the
know.
depression before you treat the ADHD. And I am telling you right now, that is absolutely not the case. The ADHD should come first. And
Yeah.
then if there is still residual, I'm not a doctor, but I can tell you doctors have agreed with me, and
Mhm.
I see this every day. Treat the ADHD first. And then if there's still depression, anxiety, then that can be treated on top of it. But it's so common for the anxiety and the depression to lessen or completely go away. Also, I was diagnosed with general anxiety disorder in my 20s. And since I've been treated for ADHD, I would not qualify for that diagnosis anymore. My anxiety is totally under control.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely how mine is. So I take medication not every day for ADHD. I take it on my high anxiety days. So when my thoughts and my emotions are so spiraling far out of whack that I can't get control of them with my coaching and with my nutrition and things like that, or I'm just tired and I've been having a hard day and my brain is tired and my anxiety then goes to the surface, that's when I take my ADHD medication is actually to manage my anxiety because it is based on ADHD. So it's not everyone's story, but I think at least like you were saying, weekly, I get people coming to me telling me this exact same experience. And it's like so enlightening for them. Like, I think I found the missing link. It's been so many years of trying to figure all this out. So, I mean, that goes into anxiety, what we just talked about. And yeah, so get clear on yourself and it'll help you get clear on everything else.
Another thing to keep in mind is that if you have clinical depression, that also creates executive dysfunction problem issues.
Right.
And so if you have both, your executive dysfunction can be really, really rough. And it's hard, I think, a lot of the time for people with ADHD and depression to look at other people with ADHD who don't have depression, who are super successful, these business owners and, tycoons, and that guy that runs that airline and, all these different things, and be like, and it's a superpower. And they're just like, I can't get out of bed. Like, you know what I mean?
Totally.
And so I think it's really important to recognize that ADHD with depression is a whole nother monster than ADHD without, and needs like a whole different set of treatments and like a lot more treatments and supports than just
say therapy.
ADHD without it. As hard as ADHD can be on its own,
Absolutely. Yeah. And that there is no one size fits all with all of this, that knowing it is the beginning of getting help, but therapy and coaching, especially with these comorbidities with people that understand your diagnosis, it's going to be really, really helpful in the end with people, with the right clinician, right? It's going to be really helpful. And maybe this is the wrong link, but it might be a good time to talk about it. When I think about, people ask me a lot also, like therapy versus coaching, like which one should I do? And generally speaking, and you can add to this, Sheila, therapy is to help with like trauma and emotional issues, PTSD, things that are in the past, to get you to a functional baseline, so that you can start to think about moving forward. And coaching, most of the time, it can kind of dip a little bit back here, but can move us a little bit more forward into our future goals and what we actually want to get accomplished now. And oftentimes you can work with them both simultaneously. I know, Sheila, you work with some people's therapists as well, right? But other times, if your trauma is so heavy that you have never talked about it, you've never worked on it, and it's ADHD based, for example, like abusive because of your ADHD, people were abusive, loved ones didn't trust you, things like that, it's going to be really important for you to get help with a licensed therapist to get you to that baseline, to understand that functionality, just those very basic executive functions to take back your life in order for you to then get coaching to move forward. But I'm happy to hear your opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And also sometimes because it takes executive functioning to get a therapist.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Sometimes the
Here's
coach
the
is
card, call the number. Yeah.
right?
I
And
agree.
sometimes it's call like 6 therapists, go to psychologytoday.com, find someone
Yes.
who takes your insurance, figure out what the copay is. Can you afford it? Now make an appointment, do this assessment. So with a lot of the ADHD diagnostic criteria is like that they will make you get a form and send it out to a bunch of people who knew you when you were a child, and then send it out and get it back and then turn it back in. This is a lot of tasks that is really, really hard for someone with ADHD. And so I have definitely had clients who have come to me and I was like, oh, actually your biggest issue is CPTSD or, some emotional thing, and you really need a therapist. Let's work together to get you
To
a
get that
therapist.
done.
Yeah. And then
I've done that with my
they'll
clients as
stop
well.
seeing. Yeah, and then hopefully they'll come back to me when they're, that's what they say they're going to do, but they have ADHD, who knows? That they, the idea is that they would go do some therapy for a while, and then, if they can't afford or don't have time for, or the spoons for both, then, therapy should come first for sure. But if you need a coach to help you get a therapist, I highly recommend doing that.
Yeah, or an accountability partner. If you're not going to pay a coach, then find an accountability partner, a best friend, an aunt, a loved one, a trusted, friend, a coworker, somebody that's trustworthy.
Random stranger on TikTok who you relate to, and you can send them a message. I've seen people on TikTok now just like supporting each other in these beautiful ways. Like
I know,
that.
It's so fun.
And I think it's so great.
Facebook groups. So I love that. That's a really good point. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah. But ideally, I mean, best case scenario, you have a therapist and a coach and they talk. So like, I love when I'm talking with a client and then they start talking about their, RSD or emotional regulation or their trauma. And, I will work with clients on positive self-talk and like some sort of self-reparenting, but I will then message the therapist and be like, hey, we started work on some reparenting. If you want to,
continue with this,
continue with that and take it deeper. Like, I'm not going to go and talk to you about all of your trauma. I'm not like qualified for any of that.
Right.
I'm talking about the here and now. And so, but being able to clue therapists in on these are the struggles that this person's having. Because sometimes with ADHD, we get into a therapist's office and just start word vomiting and there's no like focus of like where we need to be. And so having a coach to communicate with the therapist can help keep you on track and like kind of a holistic view of your mental health.
Absolutely. Perfect. I love it. All right, we're on to eating disorders. Okay. There's lots of different ones with this too. But just to keep it basic, I mean, if we're going to, okay, here's a few of them. If we're looking for dopamine in our system, a lot of the time, sugar and binge eating can get us those highs that our brain is telling us that we need. And so binge eating is very, very common among ADHDers. Now, on the flip side, eating disorders, a lot of the time with our medications, we become very, we don't have appetite. And so a lot of the time, when we get off of our medication as well, now all of a sudden we have an appetite, but we haven't had to control that all day long. So now we binge eat again. Also inconsistent eating. I guess it could be eating disorders, or what's the other word?
Eating.
Disordered eating. Yeah. I was like, there's another way that they put it. That, the way that we approach food and nutrition. It's a little bit not regulated.
Yeah, I mean, because of the ADHD, sometimes, like you said, with the hyperfocus, like you'll just forget to eat for long periods of time, and then maybe you do or you don't binge after that. And then, of course, like there's just a lot of like emotional eating or stress eating or just dopamine seeking eating, or like good feeling seeking eating, sensory seeking eating, all of that. We don't like to be bored, and food is entertaining and pleasurable. So why wouldn't we indulge in that? But also, a lot of people with ADHD, even without the medication, just like will not experience hunger, or they'll just forget that they would eat.
Nuisance.
I've experienced like a whole gambit of this. Yeah, for sure. And of course, if you start out, as a kid with a lot of, or at some point in your life with a binge eating, and then you gain weight, and then we live in this society. So then that's going to lead to other eating disorders as well, where people tell you that you've gained too much weight. So then you might start taking diet pills or purging or something like that. So yeah, disordered eating and ADHD are very closely linked. And
perfectionistic mentality as well. Kind of goes along with that, and we see that commonly in eating disorders too. So
and the like sort of this thing with ADHD, we have a plan. I've got a plan. And so that's going to be, I'm going to not eat any sugar or gluten or fat ever again. That's
unrealistic expectations.
Yeah, like completely. And we're like so ready for it, right? And then like 3 days later, we're just like mainlining ice cream and pizza. It's like, yeah.
I'm the worst. I can't do anything about it. I'm not meaning to poke fun, but we do this to ourselves.
It's been me. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we've done this.
That's how I got diagnosed with ADHD, was that even though I sort of knew I had ADHD traits, I was like, I wouldn't qualify for a diagnosis like my whole life, even though I worked with people with ADHD for the last 15 years. I was like, I won't qualify, but I went on Vyvanse for binge eating disorder. And
interesting.
As soon as I took the Vyvanse, my brain went, and I was like, whoa, you guys, I just did the dishes. This is awesome.
I feel like a new person.
Yep. Wow. And so then I went and got my formal diagnosis, and and then I just got reassessed again this like last month, and I still have ADHD. Shocking.
Yay, congratulations.
But so luckily we do, Vyvanse exists, even though it can be very expensive depending on your insurance, but that will help with the binge eating and the ADHD, but it's because it's really from the same source, partially, this dopamine dysregulation.
Yeah. Awesome. Good. Okay, perfect. Well, substance abuse disorders and addiction issues, including technology. Yeah. That's a thing, you guys. I just saw a couple TikToks about this as well. It's kind of goes back to the brain and what our brain is telling us that it needs. And then once it gets a hold of that, needing it more and more, dopamine's real. Getting those good feels, and impulsivity, it could start out with that, just not regulating what you're doing with your time, not regulating what do I actually want to do, not being well planned out in your day. You just kind of have your go-tos to get that hit of dopamine, whatever that might be. And over time, it can become addicting. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. And there's the sensory seeking aspect, where just like feeling nothing is intolerable to us, right? We need to be feeling something. And so like this, just like any drug, like I've seen some people who they will literally just take any drug because they just want to feel different, because the idea, and like part of that is like avoidance because they're unhappy with themselves. But I think the thing with ADHD is that for us, just like stagnation is intolerable. Boredom is intolerable. And at least if you're doing, have a substance in your system or something, then you're experiencing something different, and we're looking for novelty. So hopefully if we find healthier ways to get that novelty, I come from a family of addicts. So lucky for me, I saw that and never got into that sort of, like, I don't even drink alcohol for that reason. But ADHD is genetic, as is addiction is genetic. Right. Dopamine dysregulation is genetic. There's a great TED talk called Misunderstanding Dopamine, Why the Language of Addiction Matters. And it's the best little 10-minute explanation of how dopamine works with addiction. And you can sort of plug that right into ADHD.
Dang, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm excited to watch that.
Very related. And that can go to gambling, it can go to sex addiction, relationship addiction, and something for all you ADHD folks out there that can't really afford a therapist or a coach. The 12-step programs are free, or other addiction recovery programs are often free. And it's a great place to start. Like even there's ones for emotional regulation. There are meetings for different, there's like a general addiction one that has doesn't matter what you do, so it can be for like gambling or drugs or sex or whatever, and those doing the steps and talking about those things can actually be a great free resource for ADHD.
That's a great idea.
Yeah,
I'm so glad you brought that up. I had never really thought to suggest that, but certainly there's lots of people that would, because also it's what's that word, you're becoming more not self-regulated. Yeah, self-aware, self-regulated, but what's the word? It doesn't matter. It's anyway, I can't think of it, but just like you take control and ownership of your choices.
Like self-efficacy?
Yeah. That's not the word, but that's the idea, right?
Okay, cool. Yes.
And so that's what they're teaching you, right? And that's what they're
Yeah.
supporting you in. So that's a great resource. Thanks for bringing
And
that
a
up.
lot of those programs will also have CBT or even DBT therapies as well for
No
free,
kidding.
which is the best for emotional regulation by far. Like that whole thing that Kamden was talking about separating, okay, I have these thoughts, I have these feelings, but I get to choose my actions. That's all CBT stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can actually do, in Portland, at least there's free classes for addicts, but I've gone to some for fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Okay, OCD and ODD.
Yeah, those are different. Yeah.
Yeah, they're way different. So OCD,
yeah.
so
OCD.
obsessive compulsive disorder. That's a comorbidity. I mean, it just happens.
Yeah,
so.
I don't know. I was diagnosed with OCD wrongly because I had invasive thoughts or intrusive thoughts, I mean. And something to note about intrusive thoughts is that can also happen with just anxiety. So if your ADHD is causing you anxiety, then that can contribute to intrusive thoughts. And so, but I don't actually have, so the way to know if you have OCD is if you're like, if I don't do this thing, something bad will happen, right? Which I've never experienced. But it does tend to go with, you're just more likely to have it. If you have ADHD, you're more likely to have either one. ODD, I don't believe it's real.
Oppositional defiant disorder. I would love to know, let's take it from your perspective. So I believe that I've experienced this as a mother. Oppositionally defiant disorder, meaning that no matter, well, at least this is how I understand it, but they're just completely defiant all the time. Like it's all the time. They're always saying, nope. They're always doing the opposite. They're always trying to one up you. They're always trying to have the upper hand.
Yep.
Constantly, even if it's like socks, carrots, pick up the paper from the floor.
Yeah.
But I'm curious as to know if we're going to say the same thing. But what I have found is as I have started to treat my daughter's ADHD, and I have learned techniques to help her express herself better, that we have now had better communication so that her defiant behaviors are not as intense. And she is medicated for ADHD, which has been great because it's allowed her to pause more before the defiance manifests itself in verbal or physical ways.
Yes. Yes. So I have worked with kids with ODD for my entire adult life since 2004. And so it's my favorite thing. They're my favorite kids because they just don't buy into the system. You're like, if you don't do this, I'll take away your thing. Like, I don't care.
Take
if you
it
do
away.
This, I'll take you to Disneyland. I don't care. Like I would rather have control over my life than anything that you could offer me. And I got respect for that. But like what I found with ODD is that like it's highly anxiety related. So it's the anxiety that someone's going to be telling me what to do, or this, I'm not going to do it because I don't understand the expectation. I'm not going to do it because I'm afraid I'm going to fail. I'm not going to do it because if I do it, then what does that mean about our relationship? Am I weak? Are you in control of me? Am I, especially with the older kids, they can verbalize that. With the teenagers, they'll be like, well, if I do this for my mom, then she wins. And I'm like, it's not a win. Like this isn't like there's
no trophy.
Right. Yeah. There's no trophy. You're just doing it to be a nice person. But so a lot of what I did was just convincing them that the things that they were going to do that other people might have asked them to do will benefit them, and just be like, you can actually stop and think about, will this benefit me before you say no? Just because someone else suggested it doesn't mean it's bad. And then another thing with ODD with ADHD is that executive dysfunction. So we have this feeling like some things are torturous, like doing the dishes or writing a letter to grandma to thank her for your gifts, even though you love grandma and you love the gifts. The idea of doing that,
a thumbs up and a text
sounds like a nightmare, right? Thank God for text messaging now. Right? I used to like call it like 10 p.m. and leave it on the answering machine so I wouldn't have to awkwardly, even though I love my grandma,
Of course.
But there's these like things that we just have weird anxiety about doing for no reason. Calling for pizza sometimes can be like, no, I can't. So like,
Yeah.
and so that anxiety causes those outbursts of like, no, and it seems like they're being a brat, or it seems like they're being just, obnoxious or things like that. Another thing to recognize with ODD is, I love that we get to talk about this right now, the lagging skills inventory. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Okay, look it up. Lagging. So we don't think of social skills as skills, but they are, and there's like a bunch of them, right? So like and one of them would be like the ability to take no and like be okay with it, flexible thinking, like the ability to come up with more than one solution, right? So these are all a different skill. And like I was saying about the, sometimes with ADHD, we have an emotional immaturity because we don't learn these skills just by observation. So we can have lagging skills, meaning that they are below. So maybe a 3-year-old's going to throw a tantrum about not getting what they want, but a 14-year-old, we don't expect that. And so we think they're being violent or a brat. And I mean, honestly, a lot of the time they end up in jail or juvenile hall, whatever. But it's really that they do not have the skills that, we're supposed to have. And so with ODD, a lot of the time, it's just that they don't have the emotional regulation skills to handle rejection, to handle no, to handle wanting something that they can't have, to handle being told to do something and feeling like they want control. So maybe my mom tells me to do something and I don't want to do it. I'm going to go, oh, fine. That little feeling for me is a big feeling for them because they do not have the skills to handle it. And so that turns into no, throwing things. So I believe ODD to be a mixture of lagging skills and anxiety and, like you said, not having an outlet for how to actually express themselves in a healthy way. And for that, I would recommend collaborative problem solving, TM. I don't know, it's actually TM, but it's like specific type of collaborative problem solving, CPS they call it, which is funny if you live in California or whatever. It's like
CPS,
CPS, Child Protective Services.
Oh, wait, CPS?
Yeah.
Oh, so, okay.
But it's basically a script or whatever, like a way of talking to your kids to help them build those parts in their brain to build those lagging skills, build up those lagging skills to catch up as far as like problem solving and conflict resolution, basically. And so if you teach the kid those skills, especially the younger the better, then those defiant behaviors sort of tend to go away. And a lot of cool. Trust and respect. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, you've seen my kids. I know. Good job. You lived your last 15 years of your life for this one segment. No, but I love it from your perspective of working with teens because mine is not a teen. And so I can anticipate what that might look like if we don't quite get a handle on it yet. I don't know if handle is the right word, but you know what I mean. And
those skills.
So develop those skills. Exactly. So that's super helpful. Love it. And really insightful. BFRB.
Body focused repetitive behaviors.
I was like, what is that? We haven't talked about that. Okay. Biting my nails.
Yes.
Picking, skin picking. What are other ones? Pulling out hair.
Yep. Trichotillomania, dermatillomania, nail biting, things like that. Yeah. And that's really common with ADHD just to go along with it. And it's also a common with addiction issues. So I'm going to assume that there's something with dopamine. I have trichotillomania, and when I was starting to study psychology, in the early 2000s, they told me that trichotillomania was related to OCD. And then now they know it's not. And actually the parts of the brain that light up when you're doing hair pulling, it's actually much more related to substance abuse, which we know is related to dopamine and ADHD. So it goes together. Yeah. Yep.
There we are again, back at ADHD. Awesome. Okay, what about bipolar?
Bipolar also is related to dopamine dysregulation and tends to run in families with ADHD. And then also if you have ADHD, you're likely to have bipolar. Also, you're likely to be misdiagnosed with bipolar, particularly bipolar 2. If you have ADHD and you're an adult woman, there's a good chance that you'll be diagnosed with borderline or bipolar 2 before you get diagnosed.
2 of my friends in college, that's what it was. And now they're like, no, it's ADHD.
Yeah, it's because of the impulse control stuff and this, overspending, things like that. But with ADHD, it's pretty consistent, or at least like it can waver between the day, versus having like a manic episode and a depressive episode. So it, yeah, can look different. But obviously with ADHD, we have the focus problems and other things that bipolar
That's what I was
doesn't.
going to say. There's a distinction when we get into the other aspects of ADHD, however, so that if people are asking, wait, so how do I know which one I have? That there's going to be more than just that emotional high and low.
Yep.
All the other
And
things.
the drugs won't work.
Yeah.
You know, like if your you know, lithium isn't working for your overspending, then you probably won't have bipolar.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe just lithium doesn't work for you, but you could look into ADHD.
Generally speaking, and one of the indicators would be, medication not working. Tic-disorders. This is something that a loved one of mine has developed with anxiety, generalized anxiety, and ADHD. And tics can come in all different shapes and sizes. Not a one size fit all, but they do happen with ADHDers. Some ADHDers have tics.
Yep. And that can be verbal or physical or Sleep disorders, man. Well, I think a lot of ADHD, untreated ADHD, and some people are treating their ADHD, but not with the coaching and the intentionality. Right.
Part, right? So
medication is not necessarily a treatment.
Yeah.
One piece of the puzzle.
There you go. I was gonna say pill and a plan. Something, you know, like, yeah, you have to have, you need, it's best to have more than one. So a lot of ADHDers say they come alive at night, and that's when like all their good thoughts come and all their creativity comes. And so it pushes them to going to bed at very late hours. And if you work a 9 to 5, that becomes a little bit tricky. Become very sleepy. There's also just this general exhaustion that happens sometimes when we can't turn our brain off. I like to say that I have this feeling sometimes when I sleep and I don't get into that really restorative REM sleep, that I feel like I'm trying to problem solve while I sleep. Like I can feel myself thinking while I am sleeping, and I wake up feeling exhausted mentally. I have some remedies that have helped me with that, but it's real. What other ones can you think of?
Of sleep disorders?
Yeah.
There's just, I mean, insomnia or oversleeping, and that can go with like depression, or just like escapism, just wanting to sort of not be around, or just intermittent sleep. So like this was definitely my, teens and 20s was I would work 3 jobs or, 2 jobs and have college. And then want to do something creative. I was making movies and doing YouTube channel and like all these different things. And so I would be staying awake for, only sleeping like 3 or 4 hours a night for like a few days, and then want to catch up on sleep. So sleep all day for 2 days. And then, things like that, we can get into hyperfocus and then want to stay up until 4 a.m. But then we need to get up for work. And then the next day we just sleep for 24 hours straight.
It's all like dysregulated, man.
Yeah. So we got to have that sweet sleep schedule that we hate is unfortunately good for us.
Yeah, it is. And this is all ADHD induced. What we're talking about, a lot of it is ADHD induced, but once again, all of these can be separate as well. So we're talking kind of about a link a lot of the time here, but they also can be separate if you have some other physical issues, other physical problems that make it hard to sleep, or you have chronic pain, or you have other things that you're working with, then sleep disorders can become a whole different can of worms. Sensory processing disorders.
So like we talked about how with ADHD there is like a sensory component, but then there are also like full-on sensory processing disorders that you can have with your ADHD. Because with ADHD doesn't necessarily mean that you have so much sensory struggle that it becomes a disorder that it impacts your daily life. Maybe I did when I was 5, but not so much now.
Well, and your life is a little bit different when you're 5.
Right.
Well, you have to get done.
But for some people, those sensory struggles get to a point where it's actually that is impacting their life. So they're, they can't handle too much noise, too much light, too much touch, too much, whatever it is. And that
singing. Too
Don't
much
hang out
flute
with me.
practice.
Okay, well that, yeah.
That's
So
everyone.
yeah, right. But if you have, trouble with sensory processing to the point that it becomes a disorder, and that can, I think, also include auditory processing disorders, also linked with ADHD, where you have a hard time probably understanding what the heck I'm saying because I talk so fast, words sort of muddled together, which is why a lot of people with ADHD like to have the captions on.
Yep.
Things like that. Yep.
It's so interesting too. A lot of my TikToks I put up to 2 times speed when I'm taking them from podcasts anyway. And I would say probably a good 80-90% of my responses are, thank you so much for speeding this up. It makes me feel relaxed. But there's always about a 10% or so, and I'm totally throwing just random numbers out, but there's a small percentage that always say, can you please, if you're going to speed this up twice, please make sure you have captions, or can you please not speed it up, And I'm like always so intrigued by that. But once again, it's one of those comorbidities that we just don't know. We're all different. We're each very unique.
Yep.
PTSD and CPTSD.
Yep, which can be caused by the ADHD, undiagnosed ADHD, and people not understanding you and being bullied and being, people with ADHD tend to get into relationships with people that have other neurodiversity.
You're not saying baggage.
Well, I mean, like other diagnoses that, although we have empathy for them, we also recognize the damage that they can do. So like borderline or like narcissistic personality disorder, where we understand these are disorders and those people deserve help and empathy and all of that. However, unfortunately, it really can create a particular type of abusive relationship, and people with ADHD tend to get into those relationships because we're so eager to please and a little big aware. Maybe we're not going to see the red flags right away. We're afraid of rejection, and this person's, maybe love bombing us in the beginning, things like that. And so then we tend to have relationship trauma at a much higher rate. And that, part of that's just low self-esteem because of, undiagnosed ADHD, and also, not being understood by parents. So even if your parent, like my parents loved me, they are very good parents. They did the best they could, but they did not get it. Like there's a lot of like, why aren't you cleaning your room? Like, stuff like that. And even that, for some parents who have even less emotional regulation skills than mine, maybe that led to beatings, or maybe that led to real, verbal abuse and things like that. So CPTSD or PTSD can be caused by, and CPTSD is complex PTSD, which is smaller amounts of trauma over a longer period of time versus like one large event. PTSD.
I love that. I'm thinking about myself and in a different way of ADHD impacting PTSD as well is when I had 3 young kids. I had a 1, 2, and 3-year-olds. And so it was just crazy. It was really crazy. And I wasn't sleeping because they were all up and I was still nursing and all that type of stuff. And I didn't know I had ADHD as well. And so I was and I think I probably had a lot of postpartum as well. And I didn't know about any of the clinical reasons of why I was feeling the way I was feeling. And so when I think back to those moments of my unregulated and undiagnosed ADHD, I don't know how I got through it. And that's what it sounds like. I'm getting emotional, but it's just like, I need to drink water.
Sure can.
But I could get emotional about this, but I'm not feeling that vibe right now. But a lot of my PTSD from that time period of my life is because it was not taken care of. And so it was like, I don't want to say my children inflicted that upon me, but it was actually in my adulthood that just living my life has PTSD associated with it in such a dysregulated and chaotic and harmful, emotionally harmful scenario. And I wouldn't trade the world for my kids. Like, I love them. It's so fun. And even then it was great. There was nothing that I had inflicted upon myself or my husband had. It was how we wanted to raise our family. But I had no idea that I was doing it with ADHD. So that's another way of that happening. But then, obviously people can have PTSD out of completely unassociated ADHD.
Exactly. Yes. And also something to note is that CPTSD has a lot of similar traits to ADHD, such as
Mm.
executive dysfunction, memory problems, focus issues, etc. So often people will be misdiagnosed with ADHD when actually what they have is CPTSD.
CPTSD.
And and the only, in some cases, like the big difference is that CPTSD can be cured and ADHD can't.
Yeah.
So if you end up having CPTSD, if you have ADHD symptoms and you have childhood trauma or some kind of thing like that, immediately go find a trauma specialized therapist and do your EMDR and stuff like that, because there's a chance that your ADHD symptoms could sort of go away versus someone who was born neurodivergent is going to be neurodivergent forever.
Yeah. And that's, like you said, that's trauma too.
Yeah.
I was just in that same podcast. They talked about that as well, that, I'm glad you brought that up because we could feel it even for a year. We could feel like I have ADHD this year. Well, what's happened? My mom's died. It's been COVID. I had a new baby. I had a breakup, whatever it might be. And all of a sudden you're exhibiting all of these things that you've been seeing on social media or in this conversation. And my psychiatrist, what he did a good job was asking me about my entire past, right? Like, so I think the age they use is from 12 back is when they want to see, like, before 12 years old, did you have things like that exhibited this? Sometimes it's hard for people with ADHD to remember that far back.
And also some people have trauma that far back.
Yeah.
So the CPTSD happened, during that period of time. And that's when it's really hard to distinguish. And that's when, like I said, the best thing is to have a coach and a therapist. Because the thing is with a coach, like, I'm going to give you strategies that work with CPTSD or ADHD, or, some of my clients have over the time of us working together found out that they have autism as well. But the strategies are going to work for all of that. Like, the diagnosis doesn't matter. When it comes to medication, it can matter. So if you have CPTSD and they give you stimulants, sometimes you'll see the symptoms get worse, or there's like a lot of irritability or Not that can't happen with ADHD anyway. Some people just have a bad reaction. But a lot of my clients who ended up sort of figuring out that their issue was more CPTSD were ones that the stimulant medication did not work for them.
Interesting.
Or had really bad side effects. Yeah.
Cool. This is so good. All this is so great. So is diagnosis helpful?
Duh.
Yes. If you haven't learned anything over the past hour, yes, diagnosis is helpful. Do you know what's funny? Is just this week, my daughter said, "Hey, Mom, when we say duh, what does that mean? Like, why do you say it's rude?"
Is it rude to say duh? Oh, sorry.
When it's not to us. When it's a 6-year-old saying it to your mom that's trying to be kind, it's probably not the most appropriate.
True. Context matters.
But that's how I'm feeling. Duh.
Yeah, diagnosis is helpful, and not because you're going to get drugs. So, like, a lot of people don't want to get their kids diagnosed because they think they're just going to be drugged. You don't need to take medication, like, to get help. There's lots of other help available. We're going to talk about that. But the really important thing is that a diagnosis helps you understand why you're like this, which helps get rid of shame, helps you have a more positive mindset, help you understand that you're not alone. And that is honestly the biggest change. Like, that is the biggest game changer. Like, if you take away medication and every single, like, organizational strategy, but you just can feel okay about who you are and understand that other people are like you, like, that's beautiful. Like, that's a great progress.
It's well worth it. Yes. But I do love, Sheila, you're so good about talking about this, that people, like, there's so much shame and fear built around self-diagnosis of ADHD. Yeah. And so in a similar effect, you've done such a good job of giving people permission to find help, regardless of if they have insurance, if they have financial means, that it's okay for them to find solace in recognizing that they have symptoms similar to ADHD, self-diagnosing, saying, listen, I don't want to be this dysregulated anymore. I don't want to be this scatterbrained. I don't want to feel this emotionally, spiraling all the time. So I'm going to start to do something about it. And that's taking your life into your own hands too. So we want to, like, I feel like it's a good time to just bring that in here.
Yeah. And I talk a lot about how I really think that it should be a team effort. Like diagnosis should be a team effort between you, your doctor, and the internet. Because like I said, psychiatrists and psychiatric nurse practitioners, therapists, unfortunately, are not all caught up on what ADHD is, what ADHD means. I went to school for psychology. I went to school for education. I studied a lot of, I was trained in a lot of different jobs for this, but the best information that I found about ADHD is things like Attitude Magazine, where it's constantly updating the newest articles, or people like Dr. Russell Barkley, who is just consistently putting out new information, and that's, you know, scientifically backed. And there's, you know, there's YouTube videos, there's all these different things. And so that I feel like is a really important part of understanding your ADHD, is actually going to unfortunately be looking outside of the traditional means. Like, we're living in a different world now where there's tons of studies being conducted, but how are we getting them, you know? And how would even your psychiatrist be? Are they really, like, they have to deal with every single disorder known to man, but they're going to spend all their time reading every single new study? Like, they don't have time for that. That's an unreasonable
They have families, they have lives as well.
Right. So coming in with your own information. And if you have someone who's like, the internet doesn't know anything, then they probably don't know anything, because honestly, the internet has tons of information. Knowing where to look to get reputable sources is really important, but you can read the peer-reviewed documents, you know, like the peer-reviewed articles, the peer-reviewed like the studies themselves. Like, it's not hard to find on the internet now. And especially there,
a lot of them are linked.
Yeah. And a lot of the people on TikTok now are putting them out. What's her butt? ADHD Adult is, I don't know her actual name, I forgot.
Yeah, it's in her link tree.
Yeah, and she's wonderful. And so you can just see like all of these different things. So it's really, there are tons of resources on the internet, and I think that it's your responsibility to look for them. And if you can't afford a diagnosis, then you can sort of get an idea, right? You can maybe not call it self-diagnosis, but you could be like, I'm pretty sure I have ADHD or CPTSD or something like it, and I can do X, Y, and Z because of it. And you can find those resources online.
Yeah, you got to have a place to start.
Yeah,
everyone has to have a place to start. So there's permission to do that. A lot of the things that I battled when I was trying to figure out about myself was this: well, there's so much false information out there, which there is, but you don't know what's right and what's not until you've actually looked at it, studied it, and seen if it's helped your life, like if it makes sense in your life. So be fear-based, like action is never healthy. Like it's not going to help you. But if you're going out there to say, listen, I have some challenges in my life and I know I can overcome them, and I know that I can find some answers. And if that's what brings you to the internet, if that's what brings you to whatever resources you're looking for, I believe that you're going to be led to the answers that you need. I truly believe that. And maybe there's a couple hiccups along the way, but who doesn't have those? It's better to go forward with taking back your life, in my opinion, than to not do anything in fear that you're going to do it wrong.
I agree.
And so I would just,
and I think,
yeah.
Finish your sentence.
No, go ahead.
ADHD. Yeah, I mean, another thing is that because we're still figuring this out, like, it's exciting when you start digging into all of this, because we become part of the figuring it out.
Yeah.
Like, there's even, I was having a discussion with, I don't know how to pronounce this TikTok name, a therapist that's on TikTok that is great, about the term neurodivergence. And he believes that, like, for example, CPTSD or borderline is not neurodivergence because it's caused by trauma. And so it's not something that you're born with, so you're not neurodivergent. The way that I see it is that your brain has been physically and chemically changed by that trauma. And so I believe that you are neurodivergent. The definition of neurodivergence does not specify whether or not you're born with it. So we're part of developing that. You know, these terms are going to be changed based on the conversations that we're having right now.
Exactly.
And so, you know, jump in.
Yeah, you might as well. You know, I lived, you know, anyway, once again, going back to the fear thing, it's not helpful. You can't show up as your authentic self. And that's what we all need, is more authenticity, people supporting people, not being so concerned about who's right, but being curious about what could be. And okay, so absolutely, we have learned that diagnosis is helpful. So now what supports are out there to help us?
So there's so many, so we're not going to actually go into every single one. I'm just going to give you a nice little list that you can Google, and then maybe we'll make other videos later on them, because that's very detailed. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. First one, psychiatrist. And a psychiatrist can diagnose and prescribe medication. Ta-da.
Yes.
I went to a nurse practitioner in the state of Utah. The psychiatrist, nurse practitioners can also diagnose and prescribe. So every state's different though.
Yeah, it's the same in Oregon. And if your state will allow a PNP to diagnose and treat, I actually recommend a PNP over a psychiatrist. They tend to spend more time with you.
Yeah, they're more personal.
Yeah, more personal, sometimes cheaper. And I just have had much better experiences with them.
Yeah, I love mine. Cool. Do you want to do the next one?
Medications. Well, as far as medication, they can prescribe medication. There's a bunch of different types of medication. People automatically think about Adderall and things like that for ADHD, but there are a bunch of different options. So stimulant medications are fantastic, and but they all kind of work different. So Vyvanse works a little bit different than Adderall, works different than Concerta, works different than whatever. There are also non-stimulant ADHD medications. There's also SNRIs, selective neuroepinephrine uptake inhibitors.
Good job.
But those tend to work, like Wellbutrin tend to work pretty well for ADHD. It's also good if you have depression or anxiety and ADHD. They'll usually prescribe you something like that because the stimulants can often trigger anxiety. Even though, like I said, for a lot of people, the stimulants will actually make the anxiety better. So it's good to just test things out. There are also things like guanfacine, which is treated, it's actually a blood pressure medication, but can use to be treated ADHD, autism, and anxiety, especially social anxiety. Sort of takes you down from like being in a fight or flight all the time. And so you can make decisions more clearly, focus a little bit better. That one I've seen a lot of people recently having really good results with. So there's all these different types of medication. SSRIs, a lot of psychiatrists will prescribe things like Prozac, like an SSRI. However, a lot of recent research that I've seen is showing that SSRIs are actually make your ADHD symptoms worse. So even though they might be improving your anxiety and depression on its own, making the ADHD symptoms worse is going to increase your depression and anxiety. So it kind of puts you into an unfortunate loop. It does work for some people, especially alongside a stimulant medication, but that's just something to talk about with your doctor and look into, is if SSRIs, because that might be their first choice because it's such a, like Prozac, such like a tried and true. But you do want to, if they're not super up on the ADHD stuff, then you might want to talk to them about that.
Love it. Good job. Way to synopsonize. You like that verb?
Yeah.
Can we bring up real quickly people that have been under the impression that if they prescribe medication and take medication, they will become an addict?
Absolutely.
Can we bring that up?
Yeah,
because that's something that I talk to a lot of people also on TikTok about and Instagram. Yeah. Sometimes they're parents, and sometimes it's the teenagers that are asking about it, or people in the early 20s that have just like left home and have been fed this information and idea for a long time.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and just put my 2 cents out there, but I have a feeling you're going to have something really good to say.
I always have things to say. I don't know if it'll be good, but I'll always have something to say.
I think that every person needs to know their own body, and that you should never make a choice once again based on fear or based on what somebody else has told you. That you need to really be thoughtful and mindful about your decisions and not impulsive about them. So that would be my first indication. If you are concerned, then try all the other things first. Potentially try changing your nutrition, try getting better sleep, try coaching, and then potentially try medication. But on the flip side, sometimes we can never learn how to do the normal things, quote unquote, until we are medicated. And that helps us get to baseline. And so understanding that you don't know where you are in the spectrum. And so being open to that is really helpful. While I've heard people say that they have become addicted to ADHD medications, I have heard people say they've become addicted to chocolate, and they've become addicted to a lot of other things as well. And I'm not meaning to diminish, substance abuse or whatever it might be, but you have to know yourself as well. And I think if you're doing this carefully with a medical professional as well, and you're being communicative with them, that a good medical professional will help you along the way. They do not want you to become addicted to anything. And this should be, the benefits of taking medication should far outweigh any of the negatives and the side effects that come along with that. So that's just something maybe to chew on and to consider. But Sheila, what would you say?
I would say that you're at a much higher risk of drug addiction if you're not treating your ADHD, as we've talked about.
That's another huge point.
And like, what do you consider addiction is another question. So do you mean that you need to take your medicine at the prescribed dose every day? That's not addiction. That's
Right.
You have a medication that you need because your neurotransmitters aren't working as they should be. And so that's not necessarily addiction. But if that's something where you feel like you don't want to be on a medication for the rest of your life, that's also totally acceptable. And like Kamden said, it can be a great tool. So like things that help with ADHD is having a routine, exercising regularly, eating well, and all of those things require like a pretty good amount of executive functioning, right? So it's like, get out of bed at this time, work out, eat these things that are good for you. That's really hard for someone with ADHD who doesn't have medication or who is untreated. For a lot of people, some people can do it without medication. Good for you. We're all different. If you can't, so for me, I really I did it without medication for 30 years of my life, 31 years of my life. I now am medicated on a very small amount of Vyvanse, but it makes all the difference. It allows me to have a routine so that I can, do the things that are good for me as far as exercising and eating right and, keeping a calendar and doing all the things that help my brain. The medication itself does not cure the ADHD, but it allows me to get to a point where I can do the things that are good for myself. And so that's really important to note. I worry. But the other idea of addiction is that you're going to start taking more and more and more, and taking it for fun. First of all, that would be difficult because it's pretty highly regulated most of the time. There are corrupt doctors out there who will just keep dishing out pills, unfortunately. For me, I would not know how to get more Vyvanse. If I lost it, I would be so screwed. I know I have to get a prescription every time. The insurance will only cover 1 month at a time, and it's $300-$400 either without it. So like, good luck abusing that. But I know Adderall can be a lot easier to come by. Adderall makes me crazy. I can't take that. So like, if you do find yourself wanting to take more and more and more, and I know people who have gotten to that point where they're just taking it to feel better and better and better, but usually that's a symptom that something else is wrong. And so if you are worried about being addicted, you probably won't be, because you're going to go find help when those things start to happen. But if you're not worried about being addicted, maybe you should think about it. Just pay attention to, if you feel like your dose isn't enough, make sure that you're talking to your doctor, as opposed to like, well, I'll just borrow some of my friends because I need this extra boost today, or like something like that. That's when you start getting disordered thinking about your medication, where it's not a tool or a medicine, but it's suddenly like this thing that you need to have because that sort of feels frantic, or that addiction feeling. Then you want to start looking for help, and then maybe you move to a less addictive medication. Like I said, there are non-stimulant options. So if the stimulant is a problem, then you can go to something like that.
Awesome. I knew you'd have something great to say. I loved it all.
Great.
Okay. Herbs and supplements.
Super great. There's so many great herbs and supplements. I have fear about mentioning them, so because I'm not a doctor, go forth, get yourself a naturopath. Highly recommend a naturopath who's also an MD, so an actual medical doctor who is skilled in naturopathic medicine. I have a bunch of clients actually who are off all like Western medication. They treat themselves with herbs and supplements at this point. Some of them never needed stimulants. Some of them needed stimulants to get into a habit, and then they went off the stimulants and now just herbs. But there's a lot of really great ones that you should look into. I mean, you can literally Google like herbs and supplements for ADHD.
Go onto other YouTube channels, find
go find an ADHD nutritionist, go talk. But I mean, honestly, if you can just make one appointment with a naturopath, like they will give you, they know it can be expensive. Insurance doesn't always cover it, but like just one appointment to get in and just get those recommendations for what herbs and supplements you should be taking, and get those blood tests to see what you're lacking. ADHD, we didn't talk about this at all, but your body and your brain is so connected. And and with ADHD, we are more likely to be deficient in zinc, magnesium, iron, and something else. You should look into it.
I'm in D3.
Oh, vitamin D.
Yeah.
And so you want to be aware of that. Deficiencies in B12 or other B vitamins can cause ADHD-like symptoms. So that's going to worsen your ADHD or make you think you have ADHD, I guess, if it gets bad enough.
Yeah.
But usually something pretty gnarly has to happen for you to have that bad of deficiency for it to like cause a full-on ADHD. But it could definitely just exacerbate it. So vitamins, diet, nutrition is all super duper important. And so having a doctor that's going to do your blood work, look at your food allergies, like a gluten intolerance can cause symptoms that look like ADHD.
Yeah.
If you're having like an allergic reaction of any sort that's like very small that you might not even notice is totally possible. And so getting those kind of tests done, usually a naturopathic doctor will do that. Sometimes a regular doctor will do that, can just make a huge difference. So go forth and learn more about that. Maybe we'll do a video on that later.
Perfect. I love it. Highly supported. It's changed almost everything for me. Like I said, I take medication maybe once every 2 weeks and only on those high anxiety days, but I am very consistent about my nutrition and supplementation. So
yeah,
it's awesome. Okay, therapy, CBT.
Yeah, CBT is one type
behavioral therapy.
Yeah.
This is really helpful. Like Sheila mentioned earlier, this is going to help us learn how to take control of our thoughts and how our thoughts will eventually lend to our actions and the choices that we make. And learning how to sort all of that out is so awesome. That therapy is so, so helpful.
Yes. And there are other therapies that can help. DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, is another one that's sort of the tried and true for emotional dysregulation. It can help with RSD, reduction sensitive dysphoria, things like that. And then other kinds of therapy. So like I was saying with CPTSD, if you have some kind of trauma, then like EMDR is another tried and true. There's a lot of different things. Often talk therapy is not going to be the most helpful for someone with ADHD, partially because we talk a lot already, and partially because we can spiral. We might not really be able to focus on like one thing. So having other types of therapy along with it. I've had great success with hypnotherapy, where I'm under a hypnosis state while doing therapy. It's not like in the movies. Look into it. But that was really helpful. Basically cured my panic attacks. So like there's, a lot of different therapies that you will want to look into, but therapy can be an invaluable tool with ADHD.
Sure can. Love it. Coaching. We've talked a lot about that here.
I recommend it.
Yeah. Sheila is an incredible ADHD coach. I created my ADHD directory to help people find ADHD coaches. She is one of them. And I believe so much in it. So much that there's so much good. A lot of us, how do I put it? Sometimes we just have to get the thing done to get our life going. And that's what coaching can help us do. Yes. is learn that we have the answers within us to get the things done. And sometimes having that accountability with a coach, with a group, and the foresight and knowledge that an ADHD coach specifically has of what's going on in our body. They can see from the outside perspective really where our hangups are and where we're finding trouble, and they can help build that bridge to solutions that are very, very, very helpful for us taking back our life. It's great. Any other things you'd like to say?
Yeah, I feel like what I hear from my clients so often is that it just feels nice to talk to somebody who knows what they're going through and is not judging them.
Yeah.
Whereas like maybe if you have a therapist or a psychiatrist that's not, that doesn't have ADHD or doesn't really know enough about it, then they're going to maybe shame you for being late or shame you for not finishing this form on time, and or just not understand like that sometimes we got to meet people where they're at. So if you're having trouble getting out of bed, I'm not going to give you a 6-point plan on exercise, nutrition, and like how to get, a high paying job. Like we're going to start where you're at. And like, that might be just getting out of bed in the morning and getting dressed, and coming up with strategies and little tricks to just get you to the next step. And so my expectations, or a coach's expectations that deals with someone with ADHD on a regular basis, are going to be a lot more realistic and a lot more tailored to you as an individual, which can be really helpful, I think. And it's, I don't know, we have a lot of fun.
So fun. It's so awesome. I love that you touched on this, but with ADHD coaches as well, that idea of accountability isn't to like you said, to shame you or anything. It's just so that there's somebody there that you can talk with. And so if you didn't get the thing done or whatever it might be, it's not a matter of why, it's a matter of interesting. Okay, no problem. Like,
Yep.
let's still meet you where this, let's take a look at what our goals were. Where did you put your goals? Did you even know where they were? Do you have a space in your house where you can put them? Like, they are going to get down to the nitty gritty with you. They
Yes.
will never say, okay, go make a list of 100 things and then categorize them into 4 different sections and put them all throughout your house. And no, like, we understand that that is completely like feels impossible, right? And so coaching is so much fun. So reach out to Sheila, reach out to me. I'd be happy to help you guys with that part.
Totally.
Accountability and support groups. There's some great ones. Same idea with that. I know
So
that
invaluable.
Chad has some and Ada has some that you can be a part of. There's a lot online. There's a lot associated with other ADHD coaches that they develop, Discords and TikTok groups.
Yeah.
So super helpful. Organizational strategies.
Yep. I mean, there's just like a ton of organizational strategies, and it could be something as simple as like having bins in each room so that you can throw clutter into it, so your clutter isn't everywhere, to having a bullet journal, to having a whiteboard. People love whiteboards. Whiteboards aren't helpful to me because I forget to look at them. There you go. I'm a bullet journal girl here, because I can bring it with me everywhere.
I also got those too.
Oh yeah. There you go. Nice. So there's infinite organizational strategies, and a lot of those you can get just from YouTube videos. A coach is going to help you to break down, like, to troubleshoot when those things don't go the way that you want them to. But you can, I mean, looking for organizational strategies, How to ADHD, the YouTube channel by Jessica, whatever her name is. She's amazing. Yeah. And you should, like, that has like a ton of organizational strategies. So, tons of them. Go look for them.
Yep. Time management strategies. It's the same thing, right? A coach is going to help facilitate a time when you're actually going to think about a time management strategy, right? Because a lot of the time we don't take time to think about planning. And
that's my alert telling me.
There you go. I know every so often I'm like popping up because I have my alarms coming up too. But that could be a variety of different things. It could be alarms on your phone. I actually finally purchased a new Apple Watch just because I didn't want to have my phone with me all the time, but I knew that I couldn't feel time. And so I use Siri a lot. Some people use Alexa a lot. For me, time management has a lot to do with organizational as well. Like if I know that I have 3 chores that I need to get done by the end of the week, that's going to organize it. And it's also going to help me manage my time a little bit more instead of feeling like I have 100 different chores. So all those are helpful. Lots of apps out there.
Tons of apps for organization and time management.
Put it in Pinterest, but you got to find one that makes sense for you. Like you just can't choose a random one. I mean, you can, but then put it to the test. And if it's not meshing with you, then a coach would help you figure out why. And if you liked that choice or if you didn't, but find something that works with your system. Don't try and fit your round peg into a square hole or vice versa, whatever it means. There's
and also and don't be afraid of, if one of them gets boring, get a new one and then ride that wave of novelty until you find, and you got to get bored of that, and then you get another one. Like, that's fine too. Do whatever you want.
No, it's true. It's totally true. Okay, next one is lifestyle. So what supports are their lifestyle? So nutrition, holistic wellness. We kind of
sort of already touched on that. Yeah, but obviously exercise is super important for dopamine regulation and other and emotional regulation. Something that people forget is that running is not the be all end all. Weights, heavy lifting, resistance is super important for emotional regulation. Again, something that they do a lot with kids with autism and not with other kids, and every kid needs that and every adult needs that. So weights and resistance training is super important for exercise. Eating well. I tell all my clients, eat fat and protein for breakfast, and that's always their number one game changer. They're like, I feel so much better.
Oh, absolutely.
So like lots of different lifestyle changes that you can do. Look into, ADHD life.
Meditation is our next one, and that kind of goes with that. Finding out what kind of meditation is you can deal with, you can handle. Some people that's just, a guided meditation. I do like 15-minute guided meditation on YouTube or whatever. Other people just like to sit still, find themselves in prayer, find themselves in the pause, be in nature, whatever that looks like. But meditation is actually clinically, I just found out this week, clinically been found to help improve ADHD.
Yes, particularly mindfulness meditation
Yeah.
has been. And yeah, like you said, it can look like a lot of different things. A lot of people are like, I can't sit still. You can do walking meditation.
Yeah.
You can do a meditation where you touch people. You can do meditation with food. You can do meditation with, I was in a meditation group when I lived in LA, because that's what people in LA do. And and every week it was a different type. And so I got to explore all of these different types. And some of them were like us, like pushing and pulling on each other. And like, there's all kinds of different things. So just do your research and find something that you like.
That's right.
It doesn't mean sitting quietly, for sure.
No. Though I do really enjoy that now. I like my quiet time when I have such a loud, busy house. Mindfulness practices, which you talked about.
Yeah, mindfulness meditation, but also just like living mindfully, like taking I call like mindful moments where you just like stop and go like, I am here. Like, what are all my senses doing? And like, what should I be doing? Or like, what do I actually want to be doing, as opposed to what am I just going on the hamster wheel about,
Yeah. Not just doing everything rote or
on autopilot.
Yep. Taking some time to check in, to see yourself,
and there's books and books and books written on different types of mindfulness practices. It's another thing. You can just go down the rabbit hole and find things that you like. Yeah.
Education, podcasts, videos, TikToks, books, etc. Do you want to talk about maybe a couple of your favorites, and I can talk about a couple of mine, or whatever you want to do? Okay.
Sure.
My regimen for education with ADHD includes mindfulness. So I listen to the Mindset Mentor for my mindfulness. I listen to, I have a religious podcast that I listen to because that's big part of my life, called Come Follow Me for Us. I just started a podcast. You guys can come listen to Wake Up with Kamden. It's just mindset and hacks, pretty much, that ADHDers can use. I love Attitude Magazine Experts podcast. I love, I have ADHD podcast. Sorry, I'm going to miss some of them. The Motherhood and ADHD podcast as well. I do love Jessica McCabe's videos. I love Dr. LeGrand on YouTube. He has an ADHD channel. I'm going to miss some of them, but there. And the books that I have been using most frequently are by Dr. Karosha. These are Treating ADHD and Evaluating ADHD. That's kind of my go-to for when I have questions about like the clinician's perspective. And then follow all the great people on TikTok. There's so many of us now, but they're all so awesome. So yeah, #ADHD, follow them all.
Yeah, agreed with all of that. TikTok is super great. I mean, the thing for me is that because I have clients, and my clients come to me with a specific issue, and then I want to learn more about that issue because that's what's there, that's what's interesting to me at that moment, because I have a real life connection to it. So then I'll usually just go on like a, Google or TED Talk or, YouTube, like down like a rabbit hole on a specific topic, as opposed to like a specific person. Obviously, like the ADHD classics, Russell Barkley and Ned Hollowell, despite we've heard about his problematic issue, but his information's still good. I don't know. And so like, there's like the classics, but also, I mean, I'll watch really boring YouTube videos of researchers just presenting their research on the newest thing. Or, a lot of the things that I do now, it's a lot of ADHD adjacent. So I have clients that also have dyslexia. I have clients that also have autism. I have clients so trying to find things that explain both of them. But there are like specific people on YouTube that I watch, but I have no memory for names whatsoever. I don't know if that's ADHD or just me. My favorite podcast is not an ADHD podcast, but I think it is related. And it's cheating because it's my friend, but it's it's the Rewilding podcast with Peter Michael Bauer. And so I am on the board of directors for an organization called Rewild Portland, and it's the idea of rewilding is sort of coming to an understanding of what humans were before civilization, and so what we are, and then like figuring out where we can go past this, because we know that the way that we live now is sort of not the healthiest way that we can be as human beings, right? So it's really an exploration. It's not like one theory or anything like that about how humans are. It's just an exploration of how they are.
Cool.
And this podcast goes into that. And for me, neurodiversity is very related to this, because we know ADHD was present in hunter-gatherers, like a long time ago. I can't remember the exact amount of time, another thing with my memory. But
reminding me of this book too. They just got, it's called The Drummer in the Great Mountain. It's all a holistic, exactly, hunter-gatherer, ADHDers mentality. So I'm excited to take a look at that podcast.
My favorite TED Talk, I think maybe ever, I don't know, is Salif Mahamain. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but his TED Talk is ADHD Sucks, But Not Really. And he talks about, he's amazing, but he talks about how ADHD was in hunter-gatherers, and he's doing research on that right now. I'm following him on Twitter, even though I only have a Twitter for just that, to wait for him to come out with more stuff.
Awesome.
But like, you know, so that's like a big passion of mine is, I mean, we know that ADHD is better when you're outside in nature. We know that, you know, spending time in nature, and even though we are so drawn to screens, that's not actually what's good for us. What's good for us is to be outside. And trying to find out like what else is good for us socially, and then what else is good for like us as humans, like as a holistic, you know, and how there should be a place for everybody with all the different types of neurodivergence, all the different types of people. You know, a healthy society has a place for everyone, and our society doesn't, right? If we don't fit properly, we are shamed or cast out or, you know, reprimanded. And so I like the idea of looking backwards to see where we're going to go to the future, not to go back to being hunter-gatherers. That's not possible, obviously, but to just look at how we lived in this non-hierarchical way, where everyone had a place, and seeing how we can take that into the future. And so the Rewilding podcast talks about all that stuff. So it's fascinating.
That's awesome. I'm totally going to subscribe to that. That's really awesome. I love it. That's really cool.
Also beware, if you search rewilding, the term rewilding, some white supremacists have tried to overtake it. Pay no attention to them. We have no affiliation.
Oh dear. No. Why do they always have to do that, man? Rain on the happy parade.
Everything. Yeah.
Oh, jeez Louise. Well, I think this has been amazing. And whether you consumed it all, if you consumed all 2 hours in one setting, you know, to you.
With your ADHD. Good job.
But is there any last kind of things that you want to say before we sign off? Little last takeaway?
If you think you have ADHD, but you don't know, then keep exploring your struggles. Whatever reason you have those struggles, you're not alone, and it doesn't make you a bad person, and you're definitely worthy of getting help and support. And if you do have ADHD, then welcome to the club. We're a fun bunch. And again, like, just keep looking for more information. The more that you know about yourself, the more that you can help yourself and understand others. And it's super fun when you are able to recognize ADHD traits in yourself and others, and be silly and forgiving and empathetic about them, as opposed to shaming and groany.
I love it. And remind everyone once again where they can find you, Sheila.
You can find me on TikTok at ADHD Coach Sheila, or on my website, SheilaHenson.com, to schedule a consultation or send me a message.
Yeah. Well, this is fun. I think, once again, you guys can find me at the ADHDdirectory.com or Kamden_ADHD, or shoot me an email as well, Kamden.ADHD@gmail.com. Hopefully I will have that forever. I don't know. But yeah, I'm right there with Sheila. I couldn't agree more. I think that, you know, the time has come that there's enough resources for us to claim whatever life that we want, and that we do not have to be bystanders of our own life, that we truly can take it into our own hands. That doesn't mean we have to fix everything, but honestly, by like reframing what we want out of our life, by reframing what we've thought we've needed to get what we want out of our life, we will start to see really how powerful we are. And for me, since I have recognized that I have ADHD, I've felt more complete, and there are so many more answers. And if you were diagnosed early on or later on in life, like I am, the most important thing is today and what you're going to do with today and where that's going to bring you for tomorrow. And I think that, reach out to either one of us if you have any questions. We won't always have all the answers, but like Sheila said, we are very good at finding answers and directing you to the right arena. So thank you guys for tuning in. Subscribe. And I look forward to pushing out a few more of these videos for you guys with Sheila. So lots of fun. Thank you, Sheila.
Heck yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.